Thank you so much for listening to Hustle and Heart. I am your host, Edie Weintraub. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Kevin Romano, and I'm not going to offer any kind of bio because I feel that everybody does their bio and their elevator pitch so well. So Kevin, for our listeners who are not familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, will do. Thank you for having me on. So I've been a developer in the sort of general area of Philadelphia, New Jersey, real estate developer, I should say, for 20 years. We started off flipping what was effectively a crack house without any knowledge whatsoever of what to do, didn't really pull permits, but it worked. Yeah, right.
For those who are listening, I just put my finger up against my mouth. Didn't pull permits.
But that was 20 years ago, and we sold that house, made a couple bucks, and kind of felt like continuing to do it. That feels like longer than 20 years ago. At this point, we were really focused primarily on commercial projects. We have an emerging brand called Parachute Studios, which is really is geared towards smaller entrepreneurial type businesses. It is not an incubator space per se. It is not a co-working space per se, but it can be cousins of both in a way. And Parachute Studios emerged. We had been involved in the Bach building in South Philadelphia starting in 2016, I believe, for like 5 or 6 years. And Bach is an award-winning building. It had been a very, very large high school built in the post-World War II world, where they literally wanted to spend as much money as they could to keep as many people working as they could. It was 350,000 square foot, 9 stories tall, and as dilapidated as a building can be when we got involved in it. We don't own that for clarity's sake. However, my team and I were instrumental in renovating it, GCing it, etc. And it's now home to about 240 tenants, 2 restaurants, a bar, cafe, bike shop, all kinds of really cool stuff. Very much geared towards the arts and the artists and to women-led businesses. Not exclusively, of course, but that was sort of the pitch and the desire from the family that owns it, the Scanapico family and Lindsay. After doing that, I kind of realized that there was a huge demand for this because all through COVID and all kinds of other struggles, like all these small, seemingly non-credit type tenants, for the most part, did well. I mean, they kept it together. And there was a lesson in that for me. And so we went out with some investors and bought 101 Washington Street in Morrisville, PA. Morrisville is in Bucks County. It's a nice town, but Bucks County is a very affluent area. Morrisville is a little bit less so. Not bad in any way. And we bought that building. It's around 15,000 square foot. And in research, with the intention of doing something kind of similar to what we did at Bach. Much smaller, but same type of idea. I would say the same kind of analogy, though. The building is sort of a cousin, if you will, to Bach, in the sense that the design is different and the tenants ended up being a little bit different. But it's 24, 25 units ranging from like 80 square feet to a few thousand. And we've got kombucha brewers, we've got tech companies, we've got photographers, we've got estheticians, a salon, we've got a guy who makes signage. We have a wide variety of these types of businesses. And what's interesting about it, I think, is that many of the businesses, not all, are female-led. We saw that at Bach. At Bach, that was by design a bit. With us, it's not. It's just the way it's kind of been. And a lot of the businesses are frequently, not always, the first time that the person is doing their business outside of their home. And so the Parachute Studios name came from when we bought the building. And I was actually did some research on it, and it had been used as a parachute manufacturing plant in the 1930s. I presume that had to have been for war efforts because I don't think people did that sort of
for fun
at that time, right? But it seemed like an apropos name for what we were trying to do and the type of people we were attracting. And we've since kind of added this, tagline, jump with us, because again, it's very frequently it's the person's first endeavor. It feels like a big risk. So we try and make it pretty simple for people too. They're very design forward businesses. They're a minimum of a year lease. They're not co-working. Like I said, everyone has their own door. But all your utilities and high-speed internet are included. And people like that because they can just kind of know what their number is. There's not a whole lot of, there's not sort of the variability that you might have with other buildings. So we opened that one in 2001. We've since opened another one in Pennsauken, which is in South Jersey, about 20 minutes outside of Philly, around this block, basically from the Cherry Hill Mall. We opened that 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we're getting thank you. We're getting really, really good reviews. People love the building. We've already signed 10 leases, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's about 25% of the building in 2 weeks. So that feels like great progress. And now we're underway with our third, which is also in Morrisville, a different type of building, probably a slightly different type of tenant when it's all said and done, but also sort of similar, not office space. Although a small handful will use it as office, it's not office space, it's workspace, and there is a difference. And with a little luck, we'll, get all three of these things filled or close enough to it this year, and hopefully hit the ground running in terms of scaling this.
Have you found that, again, I feel like each neighborhood kind of has its own identity. So how is the second one different than the makers that are in the first one?
It's a good question. There are similarities. I will tell you that, and I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, I don't really think it is. Pennsauken's not particularly far from Philly, and many of the people that, sort of like spent their maybe younger adult years in Philly, South Philly in particular, they buy homes like in South Jersey and Pennsauken and some other surrounding towns. Every single one of them is aware of Bach, have been there. I shouldn't say all of them, but almost all of them have been there, been to the rooftop bar, which is super cool. And they have more of that, not to say our tenants in Morrisville aren't creative, because they certainly are. But the people that we seem to be getting in Pennsauken are a little bit more like the people that we would get at Bach. They're a little bit more into the arts. They're a little bit more, quote unquote, creative. Photographers. We've got I always screw up this name. What is it? A doula, a woman who helps people have babies. We've got a woman who does like really high-end weddings. We've got a guy who's a music producer, and the list goes on. And those are more of the type of people that I was used to at Bach. But that said, at the end of the day, the thing that is true in both communities is smaller businesses, entrepreneurial, kind of doing their own thing, figuring it out. And again, a lot of women. I mean, it's not all, but it's a lot. And like I said, at Bach, that was intentional. That was sort of a bit of marketing. There was a bit of desire. I don't necessarily care. As my friend used to say, money doesn't know how it's made. And, obviously we're in this, it's a for-profit. But when I say that, I am very, I think maybe the fundamental difference in this is not the Bach project was really designed to be for artists and to support the arts and things like that. Ours is similar. I'm happy to have artists, but ours is really about entrepreneurism. Like I'm passionate about entrepreneurism. I think I've done it myself most of my career. And I just believe it's a fundamental American way of thinking and a fundamental way to support yourself and not really have to be dependent upon others necessarily. Not that there's anything wrong with that or corporate America, but it's something that I really believe in. And I'm kind of passionate about providing space that speaks to those type of people.
Yeah, we're a special breed.
Yeah, crazy in many ways.
I keep my husband definitely on his toes because I am, and he is our steady Eddie, and he's got a lot of creative ideas, but they kind of happen, slowly, given that he's focused. Do you do any events where you bring the tenants together or have any kind of incubator or cocktail party or something like that to introduce them to one another, or do you find that they end up...
We need to get better at that a little bit. That's something that, it's funny. We tried to do that at Morrisville a few times early on, and we probably should loop back to it. It's a funny thing though, because we did it at Bach all the time, and there would be parties and people would have, but the thing that's really different about it is that Bach's got 240 tenants, so however many people are in each space. So, there might be, I don't even know how many people in that building in a day, 500, 600, 700, a lot. So if 10% of them show up, it's still 70 or 80 people, and that's enough to have a party. When you've got 24 tenants and 10% of them show up, it's 3 people. There's a little bit of that challenge. Now, the one thing that I'll say to your point is, as this sort of Parachute Studios brand grows, these buildings are, the two in Morrisville are a mile from each other, more or less. The one in Pennsauken is perhaps 30 miles away. I don't even know. I do think there's an opportunity to start sort of like doing, not to sound too corny, but like mixers, if you will, like where maybe we have an event at one of the buildings and everyone can come. And, thing too that's happened is, at the new one in Pennsauken, we're looking for a cafe operator, as you know. That will lend itself very well to events, parties. It's going to have a really sweet indoor-outdoor cafe, and that I think is going to be kind of become like the family room, if you will, of the building. And also the way that building is laid out, there are 2 areas in particular that are really good for communal type things. So although, again, it's not co-working per se, there are 2 areas where that would work really well and where we kind of reserve the right to add it later. But even if we don't, that's where couches go and coffee tables and people can hang out. And I think that will create a vibe. Again, the building in Morrisville is great, but there's not a whole lot of that space, like for people to sort of congregate. There is a little coffee nook, but this other building, there's more of it. And the one that we're working on, there's even more of it. I think we actually will be able to host events at this third one, which will be fun. So yeah, that's something that we want to do, have done, but need to do a little bit better.
I think that there's magic there. There's a couple of properties that I worked on, and the owner early on, I think there was maybe 10 spaces total, 7 were already engaged. And he said, we're just going to do a mixer. I want everybody to meet each other because I feel like we're stronger together. So I think that there's a special sauce in that.
I think there is. And one thing we haven't done, but that has been in the back of my mind for a while, would be to also add a little bit of that incubator type vibe, in the sense of like, bring in marketing people or bring in lenders or bring in photographers and have events that way, where like-minded people can like get advice, can, maybe we, meet a banker that might provide them a small business loan, like who knows, right? But starting your own business is scary. And there's a lot that, you kind of start with a passion, but you don't really know what you don't know. But it turns out sometimes the person next to you does, because maybe they're 2 years ahead of you in this effort. And so I think that's kind of like the sort of parachute 2.0 mentality for me, is to help the tenants help one another to kind of create that real community and vibe. So it's not just a building. I mean, and that's one of the things that's always been important to us, even when we do residential projects. Like we've never done these sort of boring white walled boxes. Like that's just not us. Like our buildings, for better or worse, they have a design. They're kind of bold. We use bold colors. We use a lot of natural light, and we really kind of basically bring the building back to what it was, if you will. Kind of like get rid of all the layers of rugs and paint and all kinds of stuff. These buildings are, typically 50 to 100 years old when we buy them. They're usually in need of somewhere between everything done and, some of them it's more cosmetic, but some of them it's not. Most of them it's not. They need to be reloved a little bit. And our way of reloving them is to kind of let them be what they are, instead of like having these weird graphics on the wall. We'll just, even in our office, you would think someone did this. There's this sort of cinder block wall between our two spaces in our office, and for reasons that I have no idea, one cinder block is like sort of this mauve color, another one's like kind of yellow, one looks like a cinder block, and I don't know whether someone 100 years ago must have painted those things. You wouldn't have known it until you ripped off the plaster that was in front of them and the drywall that was in front of that. But when you rip that stuff off, all of a sudden there's this amazing wall that like somebody could have paid a designer a lot of money to figure out. But that's just what the building was. And so like that's kind of where we are, I'd like to believe, unique in that like we're just sort of trying to get the building to kind of be what it is. We're not trying to hide it. We're trying to let it kind of show off a little bit.
I know I love adaptive reuse because yes, it's great to build new, but you miss that story, that warmth, that history. And I feel like we're all leaning back a little bit into nostalgia and, needing that sense of security. And when the news is not going our way and we want to just have that like blanket, I feel like it's much more comfortable to lean into existing structures versus new.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And we, for a variety of reasons, we've done new construction stuff before, homes and things like that. As a matter of fact, we're working on one of those projects now, and I like them. There's a lot to be said for it. But our team, because we just see our own projects, our team, we're really good at adaptive reuse. Like we're kind of like good at finding those walls that I just mentioned that other people would not, let their contractor just paint white, and then you've ruined the whole thing. And that's we've got a pretty good niche for that. From our laborers right on up, that's what we're good at. And so that's what we kind of lean into. And people like it, as you said. I mean, it adds a level of authenticity, realness that, not to sound too corny about buildings, but I think that people kind of are craving.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. So tell me a little bit more about, beyond obviously the aesthetics and kind of pulling out those, nostalgic pieces or pieces that exist and that are found opportunities. How are you designing the spaces, and based on kind of what you're seeing that people need, from stepping outside their home office or whatnot? What size seems to work? What seems to be that magic space?
So it depends, of course, on what the business is. But we sort of have kind of 3 sizes, if you will. One is sort of, I don't know, call it under 120 or 30 square feet, and not exactly. But that's obviously good for one person outfits. That's really good for estheticians. I completely lucked into this. We completely lucked into this. I had no idea, because I don't go to these types of places very often, the number of estheticians in the world who need space.
You don't know what you're missing out on, Kevin. Come on, you should.
And you're right, that too. But when we opened the doors to Morrisville, it just so happened that there was the existing way the building. That's another one of our things is, I'm normally looking for buildings. There's 2 kind of things. Well, there's more than 2, but 2 of the things are, one is I'm looking for buildings that are already kind of subdivided in a way that is mostly usable. Whereas 15 years ago, I would have been like really attracted to a big old loft building or warehouse or something like that was wide open. And I still am, like they're great. But from a pure business perspective, everything you do in there costs more money because you have to add walls, you have to add electricity. Like there's nothing there. There's no infrastructure. So I really like these buildings that have, and we don't really change them that much. Well, we change them dramatically, but we don't change the layouts all that much, right?
Sure.
So we do we play with it, but it so happened that we had this series of rooms, all 80, 90 square feet going down a hallway, 6 of them. 4 of those 6 don't have natural light because they're going down a hallway towards the windows. And we have so much demand for them, it's insane, because it's a woman who does nails, it's a woman who does facials, it's, these kinds of things, which is great. But I didn't realize that when we were kind of like creating the thesis for this, or when I suppose, I didn't know that was going to be one of our drivers, and it has been. Same thing is starting to happen in Pennsauken, although a little bit less. Anyway, to answer your question, around 120, 130 square feet or smaller works. Around 400 to 600 square feet works, and sort of like 1,100 square feet and more works. And I say that because although those price points are not necessarily all the same, meaning 120 square foot unit is not necessarily the same cost as the next in our buildings, because some have windows, some are better, whatever. It just depends on sometimes when someone signed the lease is another reality. But those price points allow smaller businesses to make it work. So we'll sort of have a price point of, call it $500 or $600 a month. We'll have, for a smaller unit, we'll have a price point of, call it $1,200 to $1,400 a month. And then for the larger ones, you're probably $2,500 and more, right? But those price points, especially the 2 lower ones, like work really well for businesses because, they just, and again, that includes your utilities and it includes your high-speed internet too. So I'm always trying to remind people, if you're going to compare us apples to apples to other businesses, to other landlords, not that I really think of ourselves as a landlord, it's more of a community, but yes. If you're going to compare us, you have to keep in mind, you've got $200 or $300 at least, kind of included in your rent.
What's the reception of the local municipality? I mean, have they offered any kind of incentives or support or collaboration? I'm really curious, right? Because you're kind of pushing the envelope, right? It's not necessarily co-working. It's kind of a small business entrepreneur incubator. So I'm just curious how those municipalities are receiving this and hopefully supporting.
So I happen to live right on the border of New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Like I could walk into Pennsylvania. And as such, we do projects in both states. And there are very real differences in operating in the 2 states. Quite frankly, Pennsylvania is dramatically easier than New Jersey in a million different ways. But the answer to your question is, generally speaking, these buildings have been underloved for a long time. Sometimes have been abandoned for a long time. And now they're not falling down. We're not buying like the worst of the worst buildings, but we're definitely buying buildings that, generally speaking, most people don't know what to do with, including the town. And so they're, generally speaking, happy to have us. How happy is another question. Then let me rephrase. They're happy to have us and excited that we're doing what we're doing. But some of them help more than others. Some of them make it harder just because that's kind of what they do as a local bureaucratic government. Like some local governments just seem really hell-bent on making things harder than they really kind of need to be, and others don't. And that's more of a political thing that, I don't necessarily need to get into, but we can. But, the one thing that we've lucked into a little bit is in Morrisville, both buildings happen to be in an enterprise zone. And an enterprise zone, many states have it. I don't know if all, but many. It is basically an area of a state where the state wants to see development, wants to see improvement, wants to see, tax revenue, frankly. And when we did our first one in Washington, we put it under contract, or I put it under contract. I didn't even know this program existed. And I was talking to a guy who was like, I think that's in the enterprise zone. You should check it out. Well, long story short, it was, and we were awarded an enterprise zone tax credit. And the way they work is, in Pennsylvania at least, it can be up to $500,000 or 25% of the total budget, including soft costs and other things. So they're really pretty good for like the smaller scale development. Listen, $500,000 is $500,000 no matter who, but if you're doing a $30 million project, it's less meaningful in a way, right? On these, where maybe your total equity check is between, I don't know, on a $3 million project, you've got $1 million of equity in it probably, or a little bit less, 750. On a $2 million project, you've probably got around $500,000 in. It just so happens that for that size project, these were great. So we were awarded one at 101 Washington Street for, it was a fair amount of money, and about, call it 50% of our initial equity came back as a tax credit. What you do is then you turn around and you sell the tax credit almost always to a corporation. And they, buy it at like 92, 93 cents on the dollar, which is great for them because they're saving 6 or 7%, whatever, on their taxes. And it's great for us because we're getting money, like it's just revenue. So we did that and worked. And this next building that we did, we were awarded that as well. And so we're getting back almost 90% of our equity within year one. So from an investor's perspective, it's great. And from an investor's perspective, it's amazing, because like you're getting back almost all of you're getting back a meaningful amount of your money depending upon how the partnership is set up. But either way, at the building partnership level, you're getting back a meaningful amount of your equity in year one. So it de-risks the thing dramatically, which is obviously the point. I mean, you can make a very legitimate argument that like the program is working as intended. I mean, because it's like causing me, as I look for future locations, to strongly consider enterprise zone areas. So yes, like so that's at the state level, more so at the local level. You know, one of the things though is that many of our buildings, one of the sort of secret sauces, candidly, and hopefully I'm not giving away too much, but it's not really that genius either, is you need it to be true mixed-use commercial zoning. It can't just be office. If it's just office and you can't put that esthetician in, it's less fun, it's less enjoyable, and it's way riskier. I mean, office is a very dirty word in real estate right now. I think that's going to change sooner than later, but it's still a dirty word. Banks don't want to touch it. You know, people don't want to underwrite it. Investors don't want to hear about it. But when you have like true mixed use that allows for, say, office, allows for esthetician, allows for podcaster, you know, whatever, that works. Because you've now, like your funnel is dramatically larger now of who you can attract. But not only that, your funnel of being able to get interesting people doing interesting things is 10x, right? And so that's a secret sauce of sorts. Now, you might get lucky, and occasionally we find buildings like our first one in Morrisville where that was already in place. And just sort of by right, we could do I mean, you can't do absolutely anything you want in terms of your tenancy, but like it's close enough, you know? And Saucon, we had to fight for it, and by just meaning that we got a unanimous decision from the zoning board. But back to your earlier question, like it was, you know, it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and it's a bit of a pain in the neck, you know, to hire engineers and lawyers and the whole thing. I mean, it's an extra step that's not cheap. And the same thing with the second one in Morrisville. But, you know, you're also adding a lot of value to your property once you get that. So it's certainly worth it.
Yeah, I think variety is the spice of life. And I'm sad that because, you know, lenders and banks understood, I get office, I get hotel, I get residential, everything was segregated. And that's not how we should be living. We should be in mixed use environments. We should be in walkable and accessible downtowns where if I want to walk down the street because, you know, I want to go grab a bottle of wine, I should be able to go walk down the street rather than having to get in my car and drive there.
Exactly. From a urbanist perspective, like exactly what you just described, we're trying to capture that in a building. If you walk down the most enjoyable streets in any city have that spice of life. They have different people doing different things. Like that's why they're fun, right? That's why they're interesting. We're trying to kind of create that vibe in these buildings to a certain extent where, to your point, you're exactly right. And one of the lines I use when we tour people is like, you know, this is not your parents' office park. And in fact, you probably wouldn't be allowed to do your business in their office park because you're not allowed to have a kombucha brewer in an office park per zoning, but you're allowed to in our buildings. But also, like we've got a guy who works for Lululemon who works in one of our buildings because they don't want to work from home. You know, so that both things can exist. And that's what, it's like a very sort of urbanist way of thinking, you know, although we're typically, maybe not exclusively, but at least for now, we're doing these in suburban areas. We're not doing them downtown because downtown, these things exist. Where they don't exist is in the towns 20 minutes outside of downtown where, you know, people lived when they lived downtown when they were 25 and now they're 45 and they still like it, but they don't want to live there. We give them a little taste of that.
I appreciate that. You briefly mentioned about the cafe space that you're working on. So beyond obviously the variety of uses, talk to us about the food and beverage component and how you see that kind of being a little bit of a sticky factor as a place where people can congregate, come together.
So I'm working on how to do this. I mean, you know, it seems simple enough. And this building in Pennsauken, as I think you know, lends itself to it really well. I know there's not a picture of it here, but there's an existing, it almost looks like it was a bank. It wasn't. But it almost looks like it was a bank because it's got this existing overhang. And that's going to be the exterior area for the cafe. And I want to make it really cool, you know, heaters, make it like a 3-season room where people can use it. I mean, put some heaters in there, some fans, a ping pong table. It's not exact. And we'll make it kind of fun and sexy and, you know, good planters and all that kind of stuff. I'm looking for the right operator. And we've had a couple like near misses, like a couple people I was pretty excited about and I thought they were going to do it and didn't quite happen, which is okay. In an ideal world, and our mutual friend Eric Wiederholtz, you know, this is where you and I kind of connected. I've gone to his conference the last couple of years, and I'll continue to. And he's been although we only talk a handful of times a year, he's been very generous with his time. He'll answer my call if I call him. And as you know, he's really good at creating these spaces that have like really cool, interesting food and beverage, which then kind of becomes the anchor for the development in the area. And that's kind of his thesis that he's trying to spread, and it's spread to me. So that's what we're trying to do too, is include that, make that an interesting, you know, that building in particular, it's a mile from the mall. I mean, there's plenty of commerce. If you give people a reason to come, they'll come, you know? And then once they're there, that kind of becomes our marketing leader for the building, because like they're going to be like, oh, this is a good cup of coffee. What's going on in this building? Edie's doing a podcast. Kevin's a developer, like whatever. So it's really, to me, it's a way to bring the larger community into the building. And then, of course, again, it's a funnel, right? Like, A, it makes the buildings more interesting, exciting. It's an amenity. It's something to do. Somewhere to get a bite to eat, have a conversation with a friend, whatever. But also, it's another funnel, like, because it gets people in the building who otherwise wouldn't be, who their sister is looking for a space. Their brother is, needs a space for a fitness studio. Like, who knows, right? So that's all part of it. And Eric has really been an inspiration from that perspective, and he's a great guy and he's really good at it. So if we can get halfway as good, we'll be very fortunate.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very inspired because I think beyond obviously Jump With Us, Parachute Studios could also be like, we're here to catch you, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's so many different ways to kind of spin that name that you've discovered, right? Just coincidentally based on the space that you pursued. So what is ahead for Parachute? I mean, you're going to continue down this path. I mean, do you have a growth trajectory of a couple of renovations per year? What is the future hold?
It's a good question. Our buildings so far have been around 15,000 square feet. They really probably can't be much smaller than that and work, it's just from a sort of the economics of real estate. If they were smaller, I mean, not to say it couldn't work, but it doesn't really scale particularly well. And there's not enough of a community and et cetera. I mean, does that mean that I would say absolutely no to a 10,000 square foot building? No, but I probably would not do it. Listen, at the end of this year, if things have gone as we hope, and we've got 3 of these things, and we've got, roughly 80 tenants across 3 spaces, like then I'm going to want to scale it, and that's becomes a little bit easier to go back to investors and say, hey, listen, we've got a pretty solid proof of concept here. We've got real revenue and we've got an emerging brand. We're redoing our website right now, which wasn't the best, but that should be up sooner than later. And we're doing some more stuff on Instagram and Facebook and all these other places. That's when I'm going to want to try and scale it. And I think scaling it could mean one of 2 ways, right? It could mean doing more than one of these things a year. Maybe you're doing 2 or 3 and you keep them at this 15,000 square footish range, which is an interesting size. And for a lot of reasons, I like it. And, one of those reasons why I like it is that it's a little too nuanced, expensive, and work, quite frankly, for your sort of like real estate investor, the lawyer, the doctor who like traditionally did this kind of stuff on the side maybe, or just wanted the tax depreciation, whatever. There's a lot of operations in one of these buildings. It's not just, you don't just open the door and like it fills itself, because we manage them all too. But anyway, long way of saying, that 15,000 square foot building has, from a market perspective, we can buy them right, because they're a little bit too nuanced for your sort of average real estate investor, and they're too small for your larger real estate development company or private equity shop or whatever. And so we usually can buy these things right. And so there's a question in my mind of whether we scale if the next building is bigger, 30, 40,000 square feet, which for other reasons has benefits of, scale and economics. There are reasons to want to do that.
Sure.
Or do we kind of continue down this road of, the 15,000 square foot to 20,000 square foot? And I don't actually know the answer. I just know that we're going to want to do more and sort of accumulate more square footage, which, from an optionality perspective, longer term, who knows how far we get in 10 years? Is it 1 a year so we have 10? Okay, great. Is it 2 a year or 3 a year, or is one of them become as big as Bach? I'm not really sure. But the goal is to sort of have many of these all over sort of at least the region, and perhaps ultimately larger. Time will tell.
Beautiful. Well, I'd love to see you in my backyard. Where can our listeners get more information about you and the work that you're doing?
Our website, like I said, is a little bit underwhelming right now, but will be improved shortly. It's parachute-studios.com. Our Instagram is Parachute Studios with an underscore. Facebook is Parachute Studios. I'm on LinkedIn as Kevin Romano. There's also a Parachute Studios page on LinkedIn, which is woefully underfollowed, but that's also because I haven't really tried to get anyone to follow it. I need to do these things better a little bit. And then, anyone's happy to reach out if they're interested in our story, if they're interested in space, if they have a building that we should look at, if they want to invest in one, or if they potentially have a food and beverage concept that could be great. We're trying to build relationships with the right people, and that's all part of this community building idea.
Completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Your passion for connecting businesses with vibrant spaces is truly inspiring. Can't wait to see what you'll do next. If you've loved this episode and want to hear more stories from folks that are involved with creating spaces for the better, like Kevin, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us reach more people and share the amazing work happening where people, food, and real estate meet to create community. Together, we get to spotlight the hustle and heart behind creating spaces that inspire us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Romano, and you're listening to Hustle and Heart.